Hey everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to another week of Tea with EC. This week I'm going to be telling you another story from my book, The Adventurous Princess and Other Feminist Fairy Tales. And this one is the first story in the book and possibly one of my personal favourites, The Princess and the Pea. And I hope you like this reimagining of Hans Christian Andersen's traditional fairy tale with a very wimpy princess who couldn't stand to sleep on a pea, and like to hear about my adventurous princess. So, have you got your cup of tea? All right. Once upon a time, there lived a prince who dreamed of adventure and loved nothing more than stories. In a castle that teetered on the cliff above a stormy ocean, the prince would play his lute while imagining the lands beyond the sea and the strange creatures that might live there. I'll show you the castle on the cliff, where the prince would play his lute. Alas for the prince, the king and queen were determined that he should spend his time in the princely pursuits of warfare, statecraft, and taxation. In their view, adventures were only worthwhile if undertaken in pursuit of power, and never for a story. "My darling," said the queen, "did you hear that Prince Oliver succeeded in slaying the dragon that was besieging his castle?" "That would make a wonderful painting," mused the prince. "Son, how would you fancy meeting Prince Hugo, who just returned from rescuing the Golden Princess from her tower?" said the king. "I'd rather write a story about it," said the prince. The king and queen sighed. In their minds, there were certain things a prince must do, and writing stories, playing music, and daydreaming was simply not among them. One of the most important things a prince must do, the king and queen were convinced, was to marry a true princess. Now, traditionally, a true princess might be found in a tower guarded by a dragon, or have brothers who had been enchanted by a wicked sorcerer. Unfortunately for the king and queen, very few of these obvious princesses remained, and so they had devised their own test for discovering if a girl was a true princess. One night, a loud storm raged around the castle. Rain pelted the roof and cascaded down the walls, lightning created jagged shadows on the steps outside, and thunder rattled the panes in the windows. The king was jolted out. As the family was sitting down to dinner, there came a loud knock on the front door. The king was jolted out of a reverie about roast swan. The queen stopped thinking about her favourite hunting horse, and the prince, who had been reading a book under the table, quickly pretended that he was eating dinner. "Who could possibly be out in this weather?" exclaimed the king. As they all looked towards the door, the butler appeared. Behind him stood a particularly bedraggled girl in long riding boots and a soaking wet cloak. By her side stood a large boarhound, both of them dripping a puddle onto the stone floor. "Your Majesties," the butler began, "this young woman—" "Princess," interrupted the girl. Yes, this princess was knocking at the door. She is looking for shelter from the storm." The king and queen exchanged a swift glance. This certainly sounded promising, even if the girl was dressed a little oddly for a princess. "Do come in, my dear," the queen said kindly. "Please warm yourself by the fire," the king offered with concern. "What were you doing out in the storm?" the prince wondered aloud. Once the princess was warm and dressed in what the queen considered to be much more suitable garments, of course she did, the family returned to dinner. The princess ate as though she hadn't seen food for a month. "You seem very hungry, my dear," remarked the queen. "I haven't had a decent meal for days," said the princess in between mouthfuls. "It has been a terrible week for adventuring. I got lost in a forest, chased by a dragon, and then caught in this storm." "Adventuring?" said the queen, with a concerned glance at her son, whose whole attention was fixed on the princess, his fork halfway to his mouth. After dinner, the queen said that she had just the room for a princess. The prince sighed, knowing all too well what his parents had in mind. He reluctantly showed the princess to her room, and she marched inside only to stop halfway hands on hips, to contemplate the bed. And what a bed it was. 20 mattresses were piled one on top of the other, and on top of those lay 20 eider-down quilts. A ladder which reached all the way to the top, so the poor princess could get into bed. "Oh dear," said the prince, blushing quite red. "The princess test." The princess gave him a bemused look, and with some effort, the prince lifted the bottom mattress to show her a dried pea placed in the middle of the bed. He reluctantly explained that his parents believed the pea would cause so much discomfort to a true princess, who by her very nature would be incredibly delicate, that she would not be able to sleep all night. The princess stared and then started laughing. "Delicate," she gasped when she caught her breath. "Tell that to the bandits I fought last week. Or the dragon. Oh, I must remember this next time I'm sleeping on a lumpy forest floor somewhere while I'm off adventuring." Sheepishly, the prince joined in the laughter. "I was hoping if you weren't too tired, you might tell me about your adventures," he said. "Right," said the princess. "Help me get a mattress down so we have somewhere sensible to sit." The princess told stories until the morning light crept through the window and around the pile of mattresses on the bed. The prince listened raptly to tales of fearless exploration, perilous enchantments, and narrow escapes. He told the princess how he'd like to write these adventures into a book of stories, but the princess was adamant that the best way to enjoy adventures is to have your own. "Oh no, I couldn't," lamented the prince. "I have to stay here and practice all manner of dull and princely things." "I have an idea," said the princess, a determined look in her eye. That morning, the queen asked the princess how she had slept. "I didn't sleep a wink all night," said the princess, which was quite true. The queen was immensely happy and quickly called for the king. Finally, it seemed that they had found a true princess. With a great sense of ceremony, they declared that she was indeed a princess and welcomed her to stay in the castle and wed the prince. "Thank you kindly," said the princess, holding in a bubble of laughter. "But my family has very strict ideas about princes, almost as strict as your ideas about princesses. And the prince simply hasn't had enough adventures yet to keep them happy." She looked around as the prince came running towards them, carrying a bag overflowing with books, quills, ink and paper, and with his lute thrown over his shoulder. "Do you mean he hasn't fulfilled enough quests?" said the king. "He hasn't slain very many dragons, it's true," said the queen. "Adventures for the sake of adventure," said the princess boldly. "Adventures for the sake of stories, full of music and art and imagination." She pulled the prince up behind her onto her horse. With a flourish of her hat and a wave to the rather shocked king and queen standing by the castle door, the princess wheeled her horse, and she and the prince galloped for the harbour. Thank you for joining me for this story. I'm going to be reading more stories from The Adventurous Princess over the next few weeks. But as always, if you'd like to get ahead or see some of the other stories in my book, you can get a copy of the book from me, send me a message, or check out my website at Erin-Claire.com. Otherwise, I will see you next week for more fairy tales. Thanks everyone. Bye.